Back here on 77 WABC, Bernard McGuirk from the Imus in the Morning program. The number is 1-800-848-WABC. Rush Limbaugh at noon. The great Sean Hannity at 3. Mark Levin at 6. John Batchelor at 9. Doug McIntyre at midnight. And then the Imus in the Morning program the following morning. And it's one of the best lineups in all of talk radio. And on the line with us right now, we have a gentleman who's running against Representative Steve Israel of Long Island. First, let me tell you about Steve Israel before I introduce the gentleman. He took Rick Lazio's seat back in 2000, and he's essentially done nothing since then. If you're unhappy with the status quo, well, then you're unhappy with this guy, Representative Steve Israel. He couldn't get his colleagues to vote to pass the health care bill for the 9/11 workers, and he apparently lacks the courage to express an opinion on the mosque. He wants to increase your taxes. And this next gentleman, John Gomez, who is an attorney, he formed his own company, he's a small businessman, he's out there on Long Island, and he wants to take Steve Israel's seat. And he's on the line with us right now. Good morning, Mr. Gomez.
Bernard, how are you, my friend?
I could be a lot worse, John, and yourself.
Well, I'll tell you something. It feels like I'm going back home. I had the opportunity. I don't know what studio you're sitting in, but I had the rare opportunity to sit at the microphone of one of the great ones, Bob Grant, and, of course, Sean Hannity, filled in numerous times over the years, including Mark Levin. So we're kind of a welcoming home for me.
Well, I wish you could be here live and experience the joy. Yes, the same studio high atop Madison Square Garden above Penn Plaza. This is the location, John. And you are not an establishment guy. You're a self-made businessman from the island out there, Long Island. And why are you running for Congress?
Bernard, first of all, just to give out my website, Gomez2010.com. Gomez2010.com. I sound like Dick Morris, don't I?
Well, not quite, but...
Listen, never had any intention of running. Never ran for office, never held office. It's gotten to the point on Long Island. You live on Long Island, right, Bernie?
I do indeed, yes.
It's been a running joke for, the last 10 to 15, 20 years, the high cost of living here, especially the taxes. And, you joke, from time to time, but as you settle down, you raise a family, you start a business, you realize that you don't have any time whatsoever to reap the benefits that Long Island has to offer because you're being taxed out of your home, taxed out of business.
And if you make over $250,000, a couple makes over $250,000 a year, you're rich. You're Donald Trump. You have helicopters.
Well, you know as well as I do, Bernie. $250,000, and that's as a couple. Yeah. $200,000, even as a single person, you cannot do much with that on Long Island.
No.
And the reality is, and I have to admit, somewhat guilty, is Steve Israel. Who ran as a moderate Democrat back when he took Rick Lazio's seat. He's nothing but a far-left liberal at this point. He's a rubber stamp to Nancy Pelosi. He votes with Nancy Pelosi 98.7% of the time. He's voted for cap and trade. He's voted for Obamacare. And he's voted for the stimulus package. All that is more spending and more taxes.
Yeah, but and the stimulus package, of course, an utter disaster by all accounts, except maybe Joe Biden's.
Yeah, right.
And he did vote for that. And on some of the other the hot button issues, for example, the mosque. I mean, Steve Israel, where have you been?
Well, Steve, my position was I concurred with the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, basically setting the precedent, talking about the nuns, the Carmelite nuns, wanting to build the convent by Auschwitz. There was outcry against it. Pope John Paul was against it. And you know what? They did, out of decency, They moved it.
No question.
And I concur with that. It's out of decency. I'm not arguing the fact that they may have the right to build it there. That's fine. But if he wants to build bridges, and he sees the outcry here, well over 70% of the people reject that mosque in its location where they're proposing it, they should move it. My opponent, Steve Israel, all he said was that the builders and developers of the mosque should consider, I think, more the sensitivity. Consider more sensitivity before moving forward. He did not issue a statement stating that he does not agree that the mosque should be built there.
There you go. Steve Israel and Chuck Schumer, two profiles in courage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, and how about the 9/11 health care bill for the workers? Remember that fight that Peter King and Anthony Weiner,
and Congressman Weiner?
Yeah, and of course Steve Israel went along with the Democrats in requiring a 2/3 majority in order to get that bill passed, knowing that it wouldn't pass. And then they tried to blame Peter King and the Republicans, and King, who voted for the bill.
Right.
I mean, it's a disgrace that these guys have not gotten that money yet, and yet I understand they're not going to go with a 50-50 vote at this point. And you, sir, I'm sure would vote for it.
Absolutely. I mean, you and I probably have friends who perished in that attack.
No doubt about it.
And of course the brave men and women who went in afterwards and suffered ailments that they suffered to this day in trying to do the right thing.
So now you obviously you were in favor of extending the Bush tax cuts. Tell us why.
Absolutely. What's interesting is again, class warfare that Obama is trying to pit, the rich against the poor or the middle class. When he says that he'd extend it for anybody making less than $200,000 or a couple less than $250,000, the question is, Bernie, who's creating the jobs? Who owns the businesses on Long Island? Who is actually taking risks as an entrepreneur on Long Island? It's people making over $200,000 or a couple making over $250,000. So if those taxes aren't extended for people such as myself, who's a businessman, then I'm not going to be able to hire anybody. That, on top of the fact with this Obamacare and all the taxes that are that bill is strewn with taxes. That's all that bill is taxes. We don't even know the full impact of that bill. How in God's creation can I sit back and start hiring people and plan for the future if not only the bill's going to hit me, but I know I'm going to be taxed beyond the bill? So, I mean, that's a no-brainer.
So we're speaking to John Gomez, who's out in Long Island running against Steve Israel, trying to take Steve Israel's seat. Steve Israel, who's done essentially nothing but damage to Long Island out there. And John Gomez is running against him here on 77 WABC. I'm Bernard McGuirk. Now, you have an interesting position on the school districts. Of course, the school taxes, the school budgets are incredibly high. We have 126 school districts. What's your take on that?
Bernard, even though it's a state issue and I believe it should be in the state arena, I believe just the fact that I'm a constituent here, I live here, I'm raising my family here, I built my business here, I think something needs to be addressed as far as the property taxes are concerned. I will add as much pressure as I could possibly add as a United States congressman to get something done with the property taxes on Long Island. I'll work overtime for that because that is a real sticking point for me. I think one thing to consider is a consolidation of school districts. We have 126 school districts on Long Island. There are some states in the union with 2 or 1. I mean, that is just absurd. Now, I believe that you can have your separate schools with the separate football teams and basketball teams and all that sorts of thing, but to have that bloated bureaucracy 126 times, all those administrators 126 times, basically and essentially doing the same thing, administrating the same service, is, in my opinion, ridiculous.
An excellent opinion. I would say, John Gomez, you sound like a Chris Christie sort of a politician, and that's what we need out on Long Island and in New York. John Gomez running against Steve Israel, who a lot of people say is just essentially dead weight in the Congress. What was that website again, John?
And it's a rubber stamp for Nancy Pelosi, by the way, Bernard.
Yes.
It's Gomez2010.com. Gomez2010.com.
John, we wish you the best. I thank you for appearing, and we'll speak to you down the line. Thank you.
I hope so, Bernard. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. John Gomez on 77 WABC. I am Bernard McGuirk from the Imus in the Morning program. 1-800-848-WABC. Your calls in the remaining moments.